This is going to be a quick demo of Project Omega. I explain more about what it is on the project page, so go check it out there if you are interested. What I'm going to demo here first is just cloning the repository and getting it running. So I'm going to clone it fresh into a new directory, and I'm going to run a script that installs the client app. So it's running yarn install in the root directory so that I have some gulp commands, and then it's also going to run yarn install in the client app, which is down inside the web service. And that implementation detail is not really super important. In fact, you could do this whole concept with no UI, just for services, which is actually not a bad idea. I just happen to have included a client app just for convenience. So I've got that installed. I have packaged JSON scripts to run both the client and server, or you can use concurrently run them both. So we'll just do that. I will start the React app and then call .NET watch run on the .NET app. So we have hot reload for both the client and the server. So here we have it loading up. I have two demos here. One just calls a web service, gets a random string, and one makes a call to web that also, which then turns around and makes two other calls to core and weather with some random data. So now I'm going to demo running this as if it's production using Docker. So what this command does is it builds a production copy of the client app and the .NET app, and then it uses the Docker file to copy those into an image and then start up the containers. So by that specifically, I mean, here's the Docker container. So for web, I'm using a dockerfile.web, and for all the other services, these are basically all the same as each other, except for the name. They're using this docker file.service Docker file. So here it's just copying the server app into each of the non-web apps, whereas this one also copies in the client app. That's the only difference. So here it's started up, it's got the color-coded containers, auth, core, web, and weather all sorted up. And we can hit that on port 5000. So same thing, but now we can see here, it's easier to see in the I have some log messages for each of those things that we're getting called. So that one that calls web, you can see here, it says I'm about to try and call core and weather, and then you see core and weather get called here. So the idea is that we have in containers, each container has all the code, but for each of the containers, only one of the services is active. So that's the idea, is that we would deploy this into a staging a production environment so that they're actual microservices. But while we're developing locally, it's just one application. And the way that we accomplish that is we just have an environment variable that has the service key, and that's it. That's literally it. So in startup, so Mega Project there's no controllers or logic or model or anything. All it does is load up all the services and run their configurations, including like registering, dependency injection, endpoints, and all that kind of fun stuff. So for instance, one of these, so they all inherit from a class called Project Omega Service, or POS for short. This is an example. So each of these is inheriting from Project Omega Service. So they have a configure services and configure, which will hook into these spots right here. So there's the load Omega services, and then we run the configuration here. So if you had stuff you wanted to hook in, that's where you would do it. And then, so for example, here I'm setting up dependency injection for my fake weather getter. So here's my interface. So that in my controller, I can just provide the interface, and this will get injected at runtime. So that's the gist of it. The idea here is that we want to solve the problem of trying to run microservices on a local development machine. If you're at a huge company and have hundreds of developers, there's a good chance that your team or set of teams will have only a few microservices that you're responsible for. But if you work at a medium-sized company, there's a good chance that at some point or another, you're going to have to know how all of the microservices work and or even run them all at the same time. And they just don't provide hardware that can do that with all the overhead of running so many services. So we want to be able to run it locally as one application and deploy it as microservices. So that is the goal. Check out the GitHub page if you're interested in more.